He's ready to roll. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Winter Flounder Management Board. My name is Mark Gibson. I'm from the state of Rhode Island Fish and Wildlife Division. And we have a relatively short agenda today, so we'll try to steam right through that, because I'm sure Menhaden will need all the time that they can get, and we have a dinner as well tonight. So the first order of business is the agenda. Are there any requests or consideration for additional items, edits to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll consider the agenda approved as presented. Approval of the proceedings from our November 2014 meeting. Are there any requests for edits or changes to those proceedings? Seeing none, I'll consider those approved as presented. Next item is for public comment. I don't believe anyone has signed up nor requested public comment. No one. So we don't have any public comment at this time for items not on the agenda. So we'll launch right into Paul's presentation on the review of the groundfish assessment updates for the Gulf of Maine and Southern New England winter flounder. Paul.
Hi, so my name is Paul Nitschke. I work at the center in Woods Hole in Population Dynamics Branch. I'm also the PopDi representative on the groundfish PDT. And since Steve Correa retired, I'm going to be chair of the Winter Flounder TC. So
he's not celebrating.
So I'm going to go do a summary of the Gulf of Maine and Southern New England winter flounder assessments, which were done at the operational update in September. Actually, all 20 groundfish stocks were updated at this meeting. Just to give you a little overview of what we mean by operational assessments, this is a more streamlined process where we are able to do all the stocks in the limited amount of time that we have. So there's some rules that we follow in doing these updates. Basically, we want to try to update the models with the most recent data, update the biological reference points with the most recent data. However, we don't really go into whether we should change natural mortality rate, selectivity, or the weightings in the model. So there's some limitations on what kind of changes we can make. This is simply just so we can get through all the assessments. The other changes that were done at this operational update was in some of the ASAP models. There was an issue with the likelihood constants, and those were changed for some of those models. In most cases, it didn't have a large effect. For the NIM surveys, we also changed the tow criteria to the TOGA criteria, which is now used on the Bigelow survey for determining a bad tow versus a good tow. This is using the sensor data on the Bigelow. This also didn't have a large effect on the survey indices. So the big rule, I guess, is this last one, which is applying a retrospective adjustment. If the T+1 abundance from the Mons Row 7-year peel was outside the 90% confidence interval of the model. So if that occurred, retrospective adjustments are applied to the numbers at age for the projections. For the 20 groundfish stocks, the number of stocks that needed adjustments increased, I think from 2 in the past to 7. We have now 7 of them that need adjustments. However, winter flounder doesn't apply for that adjustment. So last year, the center initiated this efficiency initiative. This was basically trying to get a more streamlined process. A lot of this is behind the scenes with the databases and trying to make it a more streamlined process for estimating the catch at age and being able to do assessments more often. One of the things you will see is in this update, we also use this automatic process for the actual reports. It's a more streamlined report format, more consistent between the stocks, and more straight to the point. So on the website, you can You will see that these reports in the agenda, the presentations that went to the review are also in that agenda link. This is on the SAWSAC webpage. What's also on there is the data portal. This is in the data portal are the updates of the tables and figures from past assessments. There's also the model inputs and outputs, diagnostics. So everything is available from the model inputs to the projections to yield per crude analysis. Everything's available to the public on the website. And there's also maps from the different stocks. And all this can be downloaded. If you want it all, it can all be downloaded in a simple zip drive. So it just gives you a little background on this efficiency initiative. The idea here is to be able to update the assessments more often. So right now I'm going to go into the Gulf of Maine winter flounder overview. I had the lead on this assessment. As you recall, this assessment was just updated last year at the operational updates. The benchmark was in 2011 at SARC 52. This is now a 30-plus area swept estimate directly from the surveys. Back at SARC 52, the analytical models did not survive that review. All analytical models have difficulty with retrospective issues. Basically, this is apparent lack of a relationship between the large decline in the catch and little change in the survey indices or size and age structure over time. This is what's really causing this this retrospective problem in this assessment, and it wasn't accepted. So basically at that benchmark assessment, the model went to a 30-plus area swept estimate directly from the surveys. This is a much more simple method that relies entirely on the survey estimate. So just to remind everyone, the Gulf of Maine stock is defined as areas north of Cape Cod. Historically, it was the smallest of the three winter flounder stocks. I updated the survey indices for the NIMS, Maine, New Hampshire, and Mass DMF surveys, even though the survey trends aren't really used in the stock assessment. For this assessment, they updated the 2015 catch, commercial and recreational landings, and discards. Here's the time series of the landings. There's been a large decline in the landings over time. More recently, almost all the landings are coming from the state of Massachusetts. In terms of gear types, it's mostly from the trawl fishery. About 20% or so is from the gillnet fishery. Here's the total catch trends. There's been a large reduction in the total catch. Part of this is also due to the decline in the recreational fishery. This was a significant component of the removals in the early 80s, but that has pretty much disappeared. Presently, the total catches are a few hundred tons. In terms of the commercial discards, we assume a 50% mortality rate on the discards. And on the recreational side, we assume a 15% mortality rate. This is also true for the southern New England stock. Here are the survey trends. You can see that most of the trends are fairly flat over the time series. Perhaps more recently, the Mass Spring survey is showing a little bit more of a declining trend. So now the assessment's based on this 30-plus biomass estimate from the surveys. Since we don't have a single survey that covers the entire Gulf of Maine stock, we basically combined three different surveys using non-overlapping strata. For the NIM survey, we used the offshore strata and some of the Cape Cod Bay and Mass strata. The Mass DMF survey, we used the real inshore strata where the Bigelow can't get into. And for inshore strata north of Massachusetts, we used the Maine, New Hampshire survey. Now, the Maine, New Hampshire survey covers a large area and catches a lot of fish. However, from these length frequency plots, you can see that most of those fish are underneath the 30 centimeter limit. This table just summarizes the expansion factors that go into the area swept estimates, just total survey area for each survey, the footprint for each survey, and then that expansion factor. So we use 30-plus biomass as a proxy for exploitable biomass. So this is the basic equation, which is the 30-plus biomass index multiplied by the total survey area divided by the footprint times Q. So Q here is the efficiency of the survey gear. Back at SAR 52, we assumed a Q of 0.6 on the wing spreads. This came from information from the Georges Bank assessment at that time. However, the exploitable biomass estimate is sensitive to this assumption of the efficiency. So then exploitable biomass is simply calculated as the catch over the 30-plus biomass. In terms of the biological reference points, we use a length-based yield per crude analysis to estimate F40. This was not updated at this assessment because there wasn't any real new information to inform these estimates. So FMSY was based on F40, which came to an exportation rate of 0.23. This method also uses the same 30-plus knife edge selectivity as the estimate from the surveys. As a diagnostic, we can look at the overlapping strata between the Mass DMF survey and the NIM survey to compare the two. And in the spring survey, they line up fairly close. The fall survey, there's a little bit of a divergence with the Mass DMF survey showing slightly higher estimates, perhaps a little bit closer in 2014. So here the total 30-plus area swept estimates for the spring on the top and for the fall on the bottom, assuming a Q of 0.6 on the wing spread. So you'll notice that in the spring survey, a greater proportion of the total is coming from the inshore strata. This makes sense because much of the stock is within the shallow water, spawning at that time of the year. Back at SAR 52, the thought at that time was that the fall survey should be a better estimate of the total biomass because we're probably missing fish in the spring survey because they're inside the estuary. However, as we updated the fall survey, that index has dropped, got pretty much cut in half in 2013, and now is more on par with the spring survey. So relative to last year, which we used the fall 2013 estimate, the updated estimate now increased relative to last year. Looking at the individual components, this is mostly due to the center survey index going up in that bottom plot. So to get at the total the uncertainty around the total estimate, we use this Latin hypercube approach. This is basically, since we have 3 different indices and 3 different footprints going into the total estimate, this method basically chunks up each of those distributions into equal probability distributions and picks all possible combinations to get at the total uncertainty of the estimate, which at that point you can produce these box plots of the estimate. So on the left here is the fall 2014 survey. The different box plots are assuming different Qs on the estimate. You can see that that Q assumption has a significant effect on the results. Comparing 2014 and 2015, you can see the estimates are fairly close now between the two surveys. These plots just show the relationship between the exploitation rate and the quotas relative to the biological reference points, which are the lines. Right now I plotted FMSY and 75% FMSY. On the left is assuming a Q of 1, and on the right is assuming a Q of 0.6. These are more the deterministic lines, assuming different Qs for the fall survey. The most recent estimate, the fall 2014 survey line, basically falls right in the middle, since that biomass estimate has increased. Another way to look at it is looking at the probability. These are on the y-axis here is the probability of F being greater than FMSY, and plotting these as cumulative frequency distributions. And the different lines represent different Q assumptions in the estimate. So in this one here, where the line crosses the 50% probability mark, could be considered the OFL for the stock. And the same can be done for 75% FMSY for ABC determination. Here's the stock status plot. Last year when we looked at this assessment, the biomass decreased, the exploitation rate increased. However, all the exploitation rates are below the overfishing threshold. More recently, the biomass increased, and now the point falls right in the middle, basically. However, all exploitation rates using this method are below the overfishing threshold. This plot just compares to spring and fall surveys in terms of the exploitation rate, and there is some similar trends between the two surveys. So here's the biomass estimate for from the fall survey, and the exploitation rate on the right. So the big question now is the biomass estimate is declining. However, exploitation rates are low and below the overfishing threshold. So the question is, why isn't the stock responding to low exploitation rates? In terms of the stock status, the BMSY and overfish status cannot be determined using this simple methods, since we don't have a BMSY estimate. In terms of overfishing, that has not changed, and overfishing is not occurring. So the biggest question in terms of uncertainty is using this method is what the Q assumption is. There's questions with regards to herding with the ground cables, escapement below the foot rope or above the head rope in the surveys. And the estimates are very sensitive to this Q assumption. The Georges Bank Yellowtail assessment also became an area swept assessment, and that assessment uses a Q of 0.37 on the doors, which came from an estimate from the literature. To compare that Q with this one used in this assessment, that would roughly translate into a Q of 1 on the wings. So that's a more conservative estimate. However, so the question now is, well, what if you use that Q assumption in the past? Would that changed anything? And I don't think it would, because the catch advice coming out of that Q assumption would still have been higher than the catches that were taken in the past. So it's not likely that would have really changed anything. So as I mentioned, the concern basically is why isn't the stock responding to low exploitation rates? These plots were brought forward from the PDT to the SSC, which occurred, the SSC meeting occurred a few weeks ago for ABC determination. The brown line here is the most recent catch time series, total catch. And the black line represents the ABCs that were put in place since 2010. So you can see that increase in 2011 in the ABCs that was basically due to the area swept assessment coming into play. The decline there in 2015 was that decline in the survey index from last year's assessment. And when we update the assessment this year, that line increases to basically that blue line there. The green line was a sensitivity run that I did using both surveys, an average of both the spring and fall survey. One of the issues I think with this method is the estimates bounce around a lot, just simply due to interannual variability in the surveys. I can take questions on the Gulf of Maine stock, or we can wait until I go to Southern New England.
Why do we take questions on the Gulf of Maine assessment now, what's fresh in people's minds? Yes, Bill Adler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for that report. I had a question with regard to back when you had discard mortality at 50%. Where do you get that figure, that 50% mortality discard?
That was based on several fairly old studies at this point. Honestly, I can't even recall what the studies were. It was so long ago. We always used a 15% mortality rate on winter flounder.
You said 15 or 50?
15.
15.
For the rec side, yeah.
Okay, well, you said 50 on something. Was that the commercial?
That was for the commercial. So commercial discards, we assume a 50%.
You told me where you got it from.
Any other questions for Paul and Richie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you go back to the last slide that you had up? Yeah. Is the takeaway from that slide that fishing mortality is not having a big impact on the stock? In other words, we increased the ABC.
So, according to the assessment, we're not overfishing the stock. However, if fishing mortality rate is really that low, we should expect some sort of response, right, in the biomass. We don't really see that. And you know, even when we increased the ABCs, the fleet also didn't really catch the fish. Now I've heard there's limitations of what the fleet can catch due to lobster gear interactions, but the recreational fishery has also not really increased much, so.
Bill Adler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have a rate of predator mortality on these fish, like the cormorants and the seals? Do you have any, does the stock, or do you take into consideration, and this is perhaps why the fishing isn't doing it, but they're still not increasing. I'm thinking in terms of more or less the predator thing on these small flounder, winter flounders, when you said they come in close anyway, you know. Do you have a figure on that, or do they count something in?
I'm not really aware of any data on cormorant abundance changes over time, or if there is any data on that.
Well, it would be more than, I mean, cormorants, I know, you know, gobble up little things, and they're all over the place. Seals probably too. But in general, predators, regardless of whether they're birds or fish, and you don't take into, or they don't have a figure to go into the stock assessment that says, you know, the fishermen didn't take them, but this group took them. You don't have any like that?
So right now, that's assumed in the natural mortality rate in the stock assessment, which is simply a static M of 0.3 in the winter flounder assessments.
Okay, so it's under natural mortality, I guess, in the project. But I was just wondering whether you're raising that at all, or is it just static and staying where maybe that's the reason the stock isn't responding.
It could be. I mean, it would be nice if we had some information on trend changes in the predators, you know, in like cormorant abundance changes over time. And that's what we would really need to look at that.
But
yeah, Bill, I was going to ask that same kind of question. So it's a static M for all age classes?
Yep.
Because when you looked at that Maine, New Hampshire survey...
Well, I mean, there's no age classes in this assessment anymore, so... this is...
Right, but still, I mean, a lot of the things I learned in school was about biotic potential and that sort of thing, and I just wonder if the M is so high on those small fish that they don't recruit. Because when you look at the distribution in the Maine, New Hampshire survey, you know, you see in the small fish, but they never get up to 30 centimeters, or practically not. So that seems like it's a big issue.
But, I mean, that would suggest that the mortality is on the larger fish, not the smaller fish, right? We don't see them beyond 30 centimeters. We see them smaller.
Just the reverse, that you know, if you see a lot of small fish in the spring survey and they never recruit to those larger sizes, it would seem to me that indicates that they aren't getting past mortality to recruit.
David Pierce.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. The center is going more and more to swept area biomass estimates, and understandably so, because of retrospective errors and the like. I'm trying to look forward a bit in terms of the nature of advice we're going to be getting on Gulf of Maine winter flounder and southern New England winter flounder as we move forward. So looking at the presentation you've given and the assessment itself, I believe you've indicated, and those working with you have indicated, that with swept area biomass estimates, we're not going to be in a position to determine biomass reference points, right? So henceforth, I guess ASMFC, as well as the council, of course, will not be able to determine biomass reference points, so henceforth we will never be able to know whether we are overfished or not. Is that a conclusion that's safe to draw?
Yeah, so from this method, we can't determine that overfish status. Now, if there truly was a response in the stock, I think we would start seeing evidence of that in the fishery and in the surveys.
Anyone else before we move on to the Southern New England report? Seeing none, Paul, why don't you go ahead with that?
Okay, the Southern New England stock, Tony Wood had the lead on this assessment. This is a ASAP model This assessment's done with the ASAP model, which is a forward projecting age structured assessment model. This one was last assessed in 2011 at SARC 52. So this one's been a while since it's been looked at. Like this Gulf of Maine stock, there's been a large reduction in the total removals over time. Also, like the Gulf of Maine stock, the recreational component has declined faster than perhaps the commercial fishery. And perhaps the decline in this assessment is actually more dramatic than the Gulf of Maine in terms of where we are now, more recently compared to the 1980s. So this is just looking at that same plot on a proportion basis. Back in 2010, remember this stock went to a no possession management when sectors came on board. That's why you see the discard estimates increasing in those years. And 2013 went back to an allocated stock, and the discards declined. Here's the catch at age that went into the stock assessment. You do notice the ages of fish are getting older that are being caught. And there's perhaps some indication of older fish in the catch at age more recently. This plot is the mean weights at age over time, unlike some of the other groundfish stocks where we see dramatic declines in the mean weights at age with time. We don't really see that with the southern winter flounder stock. So it appears the condition factors aren't changing much for this stock. So this assessment has many different survey indices incorporated into the model. We have the center, spring and fall, and winter indices, Mass DMF spring survey, Rhode Island spring, Connecticut spring, New Jersey, and also several different recruitment indices go into the model. Back at SARC 52, the NEOMAP and Rhode Island GSO survey were also added. Here's a plot of the center and Mass DMF spring surveys. You can see in general there's this long decline in the indices. More recently, the indices are near time series lows. This plot compares all the different state surveys. Perhaps more dramatically in the state indices, we see more of a dramatic decline in the index, being at very low levels in 2014. And here are the recruitment H0 indices. Of course, these are more noisy, but overall, this is general decline in the young in the year indices. So the final model configuration basically uses a single fleet, 14 different indices, natural mortality of 0.3. The model has 2 selectivity blocks, with the second block starting in 1994. So in the commercial fishery, the model is allowed to produce a dome-shaped selectivity. I believe in this update, the second block actually became more domed than the previous assessment. And the survey indices also have allowed to have dome-shaped selectivity. Some of the surveys, of course, have more dramatic domes than others. This plot shows the SSB on the left and the fishing mortality rate on the right. The solid line represents the new updated model, and the dashed line is the last assessment from SOC 52. And the gray bars represent the 90% confidence intervals around the estimates. The red dot at the end of the time series represents what a row adjustment would look like. So for this assessment, that row adjustment was just on the inside of the 90% confidence intervals. Therefore, a row adjustment was not used in this assessment. However, it's getting near that limit of where you would use one. So overall, in terms of the biomass, the stock has been at a low level with not much indication of increases for several decades now, and remains below the overfished threshold. In terms of overfishing, fishing mortality has come down and has been below the overfishing threshold. So the real concern now with this assessment is the recruitment trend. The recruitment continues to decline. It appears every time we update this assessment, the recruitment just continues to decline, and we don't see a response in recruitment. Fishing mortality rate appears to have declined. However, we don't really see the production coming out of the stock. We don't see any improvements in recruitment. Here's the SSB breakdown over time. You'll notice that more recently from the assessment, it indicates that a greater proportion of the age distribution is coming from the older fish, from the plus group. And here's the breakdown in terms of numbers at age on a proportion basis. You can also see that the plus group and the older fish are increasing at the end of the time series. However, when we look at the trend in the total numbers at age, even though we have this increasing proportion in the plus group, the real issue is this declining trend in recruitment coming in, which is causing the total numbers at age to decline. This is the retrospective pattern, and so there is a significant retrospective issue. However, it didn't qualify as needing a row adjustment according to the criteria, but it's still a concern for the assessment. So in terms of stock status, the stock status has not changed since the last assessment. Overfishing is not occurring, and the stock remains as overfished. The SSB MSY has declined since the last assessment, and fish FMSY has increased. Here's the stock status plot. And basically the stock has now declined to a low biomass, but has now also fallen into the lower left-handed box where we're not overfishing the stock. But we don't really see any evidence of increases, which is what you would expect when the fishing mortality rate's low. So some sources of uncertainty with this assessment is there's questions about the natural mortality rate. There's also some uncertainty with the length distributions coming out of the recreational fishery. Part of that is just simply because the recreational fishery is so small now. And of course, there's a retrospective issue in the model. So the rebuilding plan now for this assessment was to 2023. According to projections coming off this assessment, the model cannot rebuild to that date. Well, it can rebuild to that date with an F equals 0 with a 40% probability. So the requirement now is to have a 50% probability to get to that date, so the conclusion is that it can't get to that rebuilding end date with a 50% probability. So here's that same catch plot we saw for the Gulf of Maine stock. So the ABCs are the black line in 2010, 11, and 12. Those ABCs were based off the no possession management, which was based off a slightly different assumption. It was based off a bycatch assumption coming out of the last assessment, because the stock couldn't rebuild by the end date at that time. Since then, the ABCs increased because the rebuilding plan was updated and projections were used. That's what produced those 3 high ABCs. Now, more recently, when we update the assessment this year, the FMSY and FMSY projections declined. And basically, the 75% FMSY line, which is that blue line, is very close to what recent catches have been. The purple dot there is basically the catch assumption that goes into the bridge year for the projections. And that's all I have for Southern New England.
Thank you, Paul. Questions for Bill Adler and then Dave Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things. First of all, I think I've said this before, that I think the bar is too high that is being set. Now, this won't change your report on the stock and whether they're fish or not, but I mean, I think that when we keep looking at the targets and thresholds and they're up in the stratosphere somewhere, and I've asked before, I said, well, who set it that high? Because it hasn't been anywhere near that, in spite of what we've done. And they said, well, it was set back in the 80s, when for some reason, I guess the stock was up there, and maybe, I don't know how they were counting them back then or whatever, but I do think that for this Southern New England stock, I think we should look at lowering the bar a little down, not that you're going to do away with overfished, but getting closer to where we are traditionally being lined up as. That was one thing, and you know, I still think that's a necessity, just so when we look at things, we go, this is hopeless. Well, maybe it's not, if you get more realistic with the targets and threshold lines. The natural mortality, you said, is 0.03, but you also just said that there's some uncertainty here as to whether that's correct, which, once again, I go back to what I did in the Gulf of Maine one, of the other factors that are keeping this stock from rebuilding, because obviously it's not the fishing pressure that's keeping it down, so something else is. And so I think that's uncertainty. It's very upsetting when it says there's no improvement in the stock after all the stuff we've done, and you want to go, well, why? And I think that's a question you're saying too, why? So I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating for me also, because I don't have the answers to why, right? I mean, all I see is what's going on. We don't have a lot of the data sources, like you said, with the predators. We don't have a smoking gun on what's really causing it. All we know is, from the assessment, is that recruitment is declining. The production is declining out of the stock. Why that's occurring is not completely clear.
Dave?
Yep, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Paul, too. Good presentations. You have a figure, don't you, of biomass over time? What I'm interested in for Southern New England is that period where we had the moratorium on harvest in federal waters, and what, if any, kind of response we saw in the population when we were doing as much as we could to, preserve biomass. So that occurred in 2010. What years were the moratorium? Can you help me?
10, 11, 12, I think.
Okay, so those were the 3 years where we saw a very, very rapid increase in biomass. 10 was the low spot, and it seems to me we saw a response when we stopped harvesting fish, killing them on purpose. We were seeing a response, and I think some of our inshore surveys saw the same thing, and so that gives me some hope that there is something we can do to try to rebuild biomass, rebuild spawning stock biomass, and improve the prospects for improved recruitment, because I'm sure you're aware there's been a very long time series, very, very intensive study of the Nyack River winter flounder population at Millstone Power Station done by the environmental lab there. And, we've gone from 80,000 adult spawners in that river system to like a couple hundred. And so I think we're really at an egg deficit. It's hard to understand where even they find larvae, but we just don't have any spawning biomass. So I think that's an important part of this recruitment failure. And there are environmental factors too. I think with the work they've done, they've shown that from one cause or another, warmer winters tend to produce weaker year classes, and it probably has to do with timing of predators and eggs and larvae. Seeing that in the assessment kind of bears out that we can, there is still some responsiveness in the stock. I mean, would you agree with that, or do you think there's something else going on there? Go on.
Up near the beginning.
Yeah.
So you can see on here, this is the total removals. So the moratorium went in 2010. Assuming that, this is a result of the catch, of that moratorium on the catch, right? It converted some of the landings to discards. The estimated discards, the overall catch was a little bit lower too, compared to more recently. So, there you can see, what we're talking about in terms of differences in catch. It's not really that different compared to the recent catches. It's a little bit higher, but we're really near the low of the whole time series here.
Yeah, I agree. There isn't enough left to catch that you could change it dramatically, but, it looks to me like we cut it by 2/3 or 3/4 from 2008, and then we allowed it to double or triple. So, yep, in absolute magnitude, it's a little, because there's only so many fish left in the ocean, but in terms of percentage of what we left in the ocean, it was a vast improvement, and it seems like we were beginning to see some response. And I think we're slipping again. So,
yeah, this is something we could look maybe a little closer into the surveys if we see a response in the surveys. Right now, part of that response is just simply because the catch is lower in the model. So is there evidence, was there really evidence in the surveys at that particular time that the biomass has increased? It's something we could look into a little bit more.
Dave Pierce.
Yeah, Paul, you were able to do ASAP with the Southern New England stock, but you did swept area for the Gulf of Maine. I can't recall, why couldn't you do ASAP for the Gulf of Maine to calculate biomass targets?
So in the Gulf of Maine, the retrospective was one of the worst retrospectives we've had with the Gulf of Maine stock. Part of that, I think, comes from when we look at the recruitment indices, they're fairly flat. You don't really see much evidence of a decline in recruitment, or you don't really see any big changes in the indices over time in the Gulf of Maine. In the Southern New England stock, you do see more of a change. You see declining trends in recruitment, declining trends in the indices. All the indices are kind of showing the same thing. So the trends in the indices line up with what we're seeing on the catch side. The issue now is it appears it's no longer fishing, it's recruitment. It's not coming in, the production's not coming in.
Good, thank you. One final thing. You were able to do ASAP for the Southern New England stock. Did anyone do a swept area biomass for the Southern New England stock to compare the results of both approaches? That might be revealing, especially since, again, we're relying more and more on swept area biomass estimates. I really would like to see the comparison between the two, and perhaps if you did the comparison, you might get some insights into the Q value.
Yeah, we have not done that, but I think that's a good idea.
Dave Borden.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Paul, I'm just curious, and I may have missed it, but was the NEMAP survey used in the Southern New England area? Is that part of the?
Yep.
It was. And do you have a figure for that you could put up? I'm just curious. Okay. Thank you. And then
I'm not sure if it was in my plots. I can probably dig that out if you're interested.
Okay. I'd just be curious because the last time the board discussed this, there was, if my recollection is correct, there was an upturn in that indices the last time we discussed it. But I've had some conversations with individuals that seem to indicate that it's gone, that survey has gone the other way, and I'd just be curious. And then the other question is, I attended the SSC meeting, but I can't recall what was the final biological advice from the SSC on this stock.
So the SSC report is not out yet from that meeting, but when we look at the catch plots, we showed that we brought forward to the SSC two scenarios: the 75% FMSY projection, which is that blue line, and a constant projection, which is using the lowest value and keeping that constant, which was a 2017 estimate. I believe that was 780 metric tons, and I believe the SSC is going to bring that forward for consideration for ABCs.
Any other questions for Paul on Southern New England stock status? Dave Simpson.
Well, just on that, I wonder how does that recommendation fit with the finding you mentioned earlier that that there's only a 40% probability of achieving the target biomass by 2023. How do those things fit together?
Yeah, so these estimates don't consider the fact that you can't rebuild a stock, basically, by that end date.
Yes, Pat Augustine.
Thank you, Mark. I had to gather my thoughts after my mess this morning. Very good presentation. we keep skirting around the area of predation. I think Bill Adler brought up the cormorant thing. It's always been out there, and we never seem to be able to get a count on numbers of cormorants and what the actual effect is. Same way with seals. I'm wondering when we're going to get to that point in time where we dedicate some effort in looking at what the count, the seal count has been. Go back as far as we can. Maybe it's 1970, and lay on the chart a number of seals, estimated or otherwise seen, then through the years and where we are now. Visually, when you look at the number of cormorants we have around Long Island, I did talk with Audubon, and they were willing to make some numbers available to me if I wanted to do it. We were talking about trying to put together a depredation plan.
I think we're drifting into the next agenda item. We're just trying to conclude the questions on the stock assessment at this point.
Okay, well, I think those are the things that keep popping up in my mind, Mark, and thank you very much. I'll wait for the next agenda item.
Any other questions on the stock assessment for Southern New England? And then we'll get into the next agenda item on management response. Seeing none, we can move that. So where I think we are is we have, the stock assessments have been done, peer-reviewed. The PDT and SSC have deliberated on them. The reports haven't come out yet. And it's my understanding that the Groundfish Committee is going to meet in the next couple weeks. Council chair is here and members of the Groundfish Committee to receive that advice and then formulate their own, pass it on to the council for first week in December in Framework 55 specification setting. This board can set our commission specification by board action, but it seems to me our information basis to inform us on that is incomplete at this point. So it would seem to me that we want to let that process play out and perhaps do some tasking the technical committee to review the stock assessments, keep track of what's going on in terms of SSC advice and council action, and be prepared to advise us on specifications for at the December meeting. That's where I think we're at. If the board disagrees or if my council colleagues have other things to add, I'm happy to hear that. So I think we would be tasking Dave Borden.
I don't disagree with postponing a decision until a subsequent meeting, but I think it would be a good idea to at least have a discussion of the direction that the commission would like this issue to go. I think, at least my own view, I think David Simpson's point was dead on. The information in the SSC report is very clear that, and in this presentation is very clear, even if you reduce fishing mortality to zero, there's only a 40% probability of rebuilding by the end of the rebuilding period. And I would just emphasize, this isn't the first rebuilding period, this is the second rebuilding period. So, and I'd also make the point that I think we should be fairly direct with the council, and we get a lot of council members here that under their previous regulations, things were improving. That's a real, and now they're going the other way as far as I'm concerned. So I think to the extent we can give them advice without getting into the specifics, that would be useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Any other thoughts on the management response? I mean, I certainly agree that I think, and I supported the council action, as under the rationale of continuing the data stream to allocate, to the sectors and the common pool sub-ACL, minimize discards, turn them into landings, but it doesn't look to me as though that has been the correct strategy at this point. The total catch removals have gone up against a reduced biomass, so we've done more than turn discards into landed catch. The fishing mortality was an all-time low, and I actually think 2009 was the first year, because that was an interim action by the agency ahead of Council's Amendment 16. So we had a number of years of fairly low fishing mortality rates. There seemed to be some response in terms of biomass increasing the number of older fish, and now it looks like we're going the other direction. So I guess I've had to eat some of my words on what I said a couple of years ago in credit the ASMFCs for the board for anticipating an unfortunate circumstance. But yeah, we're not suggesting we not have a discussion on possible management response. I was just shying away from any specification discussion. So yeah, any board discussions on your perception of where we need to go, tasking to the TC, signals to the council. I think we've got half hour to deal with that if we like to.
Yeah, I think as David said, and as this board agreed to a couple of meetings ago, we actually, I thought, had agreed to send a letter to the council and to the service urging the most conservative action that they could muster to try to give this stock a chance to rebuild, and I haven't changed my view that that's, I think, the most prudent thing we could do. We have to remember this stock is really a complex of smaller stocks, and we see this on a very fine scale in local state waters, and it's felt very very much at that local level and is evident at that local level. And I'll keep going back to the Niantic River study because there's so much detail there, and just the absence of reproductive biomass out there is any fish we can leave, to swim back from federal waters into state and reproduce. I think we need to make that effort to do that, to give this stock a chance, because it is fighting against, I think, climate change and all of that comes with that, a change in suite of predators, and there are masses of summer flounder in rivers eating up summer flounder and every other thing. There our winter flounder young of year survey, that's what we used to call it, now catches 100 times more black sea bass than it does winter flounder. There are lots of changes out there. They catch more scup than winter flounder, something we never would have imagined in the 1980s, but that's what our survey looks like in 2015. So it's an uphill battle, but I think that just means we need to work harder to try to preserve what we can of this stock when it has to leave state waters to find cooler waters, and that means in federal waters and exposure to a federal waters fishery.
Thanks, Dave. Tony, what is the status of our communications with the council, and is there an opportunity to communicate with them on behalf of this board prior to was it first week in December we meet next, Terry? Yeah.
Yeah, I believe the council meeting's that first week in December. I don't know when the groundfish meeting is. I would turn to Doug or Terry 2 weeks from now. So the letter, I think I passed it back to the states to draft some language changes to it, because we were getting some, even at that last meeting that we had a little bit of different direction from some board members. So we put it in a place where we could, and then we were looking for a response back for final edits. But we can wrangle you guys a little harder. The other question that I have for the board is Bob and I will be at the NRCC meeting, the Northeast Regional Coordinating Council meeting, and I had guessing that this would be an important topic at this board meeting, and I asked for time on the NRCC agenda for winter flounder discussion. So if there's anything that you would like Bob or I to bring forward to the NRCC for collaboration, either on studies or just a continue urging of proactive conservative management, in particular for southern New England, please let us know, or continue this discussion of what we can bring to the NRCC on behalf of the commission.
Thanks. It seems that, based on what we've heard today in board discussion, we probably have more of a convergence of view on the letter and our request to the agency. So I'd be happy to, work with you on that, if that's, the board's okay with that. Get it into the council's hands before they meet in December. How about technical commit? Terry, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering about the timeline, whether or not it'd be possible to have it in hand before the Groundfish Committee meeting, which I believe is 2 weeks from today.
Tony?
Yes, we can do that, and we can even work on the letter while we're here and get you while you're here.
Sounds like the answer is yes on that. Okay, Bud.
Tony, is that going to apply to the Gulf of Maine stock as well?
That's the direction of the board. I would just need to know what the board would like to do.
It's the board's pleasure on that. It seems that Southern New England is more serious than Gulf of Maine is. I don't know if you want to commingle those issues in a discussion with the council or not. I think up to this point we've been talking about communications on the Southern New England resource and our concerns about that. I see a bunch of heads nodding on that. So, David?
Yeah, that has been the discussion and the much clearer stock condition and history. The Gulf of Maine, I mean, they may separately want to, and couch slightly differently for their conditions, make some kind of statement for the ahead of the groundfish meeting. But, you know, the Gulf of Maine assessment being new, it only seemed to go back 6, 8, 10 years. There's not a lot of perspective. I don't want to lose the focus and the impact of the clearly urgent condition of Southern New England.
Thank you. We'll go Roy Miller, then Terry.
Mr. Chairman, I confess that I find it hard to be optimistic when I listen to statements like it can be rebuilt by 2023 if F is 0 and at a 40% probability. I'm wondering from the perspective of a southern state which once had a recreational fishery for winter flounder, at least within my memory, but I'm old enough to remember back that far. Younger folks don't remember ever having a recreational fishery for winter flounder down our way. And where the capture of a juvenile winter flounder in one of our shoreline seine surveys is now a rare event and a notable event when it happens. What on earth can we do, Mr. Chairman? The frustration I feel in this board mirrors the frustration I feel to a certain extent in the weakfish board. And, you know, really, is there any hope of rebuilding this stock? And if so, how do we proceed? Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. I guess my response to that, I think that's one of our taskings to the technical committee is to take a look at the stock assessment and see if they concur with some of the board's evaluations that, in fact, we were making some progress under very low fishing mortality, and that when reallocation occurred and the catches, doubled, it's hard to see on that small scale, but in fact there was, in terms of proportional increase, a fairly significant increase. See if our technical committee concurs with that we were making some inroads during the years of prohibition and the very federal prohibition and on retention and the very low state possession limits. If they come back and say we concur with what the board has discussed on that, then I think we have a stronger hand to play than perhaps we think. But I think where I'm trying to get to now is tasking for the technical committee. I think we need both a report from the technical committee and the advisory panel on specifications for the next meeting that would take account of the information Paul has presented and what transpires at the groundfish committee on 2 weeks from today. That would be where I think what we need to task the technical committee with. Tom, I think I had Terry Stockwell and Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Roy raises an issue that strikes home with me. I mean, it's much like with Northern Shrimp where we had to have the technical committee rescale the x-axis so we could even see what the abundance of shrimp was. I mean, we've worked hard. We've cranked the cod fishery down by almost 80%. We've failed to see any really positive results from that. But to address the issue of the Gulf of Maine, I think the letter could be generic enough to reflect both the Gulf of Maine and the Southern New England, but to highlight the particular critical needs of Southern New England at this point. So I could cover both bases.
Tom.
tell you how depressing it is. We've had strict dredging requirements in New Jersey for, many years that you could not dredge when the winter flounders spawn. Cape May has made a big push to basically, because it really restricts a lot of the marinas to what they want to do, and maintenance dredging, because the only time they can dredge is during the summertime, is when the docks are basically. And we're going to lift, New Jersey's going to lift some of those restrictions now so they can start dredging, because they can't find any real juveniles. And I think Little Egg Harbor, Great Egg Harbor, they actually found a couple this year down there as juvenile. But there's going to be push from even other areas in New Jersey to do the same thing, because by this closure, and I fought against it, but I lost that battle. As we get more depressed in stocks, things are going to happen that will affect maybe the comeback in the Delaware Bay. I don't know how did your state still keep the winter flounder closures for dredging? I mean, yeah.
Dave Pierce, next, and then Tom Baum.
Yeah, I'll focus on the Gulf of Maine cod stock for a second. Yes, the technical committee has to look at this assessment information and provide us with some advice, and I would suggest that advice could be done in the context of what we did, what this board did back at the end of 2012. If you recall, the ACL, the catch limit, went up for Gulf of Maine cod, and that resulted in an increase in the state waters subcomponent, that is, that amount of the ACL, that amount of the ABC that was set aside for non-federal permit holders. As a consequence of that, we increased our possession limit collectively. We increased our possession limit for the commercial fishermen from 200 to 500, I think. Went up to 500 pounds in response to that. So the question now becomes, what does the new assessment information reveal to us relative to that non-federal permit holder component? Do we have to go back and look at the trip limit that we implemented back in 2012, early 2013, bring it back down to some lower level? Does that make sense? Also, the recreational fishery. You recall, I think we went with a year-round recreational fishery, low catch limit, but still it was year-round. So all that has to be looked at again, I suspect, in light of this new information and the state waters subcomponent for the commercial fishery, which also involves taking a look at the recreational fishery as well. I can't speak to the southern New England situation, except it's not good. But I still think it's got a lot to do with seals. From my perspective, at the eastern entrance of Nantucket Sound, the southern entrance of Nantucket Sound, Muskeget Island, Monomoy Island in the area. I think Muskeget Island, that's got a phenomenal population of horsehead seals. And when I saw the photograph of winter flounder up on the screen, it looked like easy pickings for very hungry seals. As the flounder leave the estuaries and salt ponds in the spring, going to Nantucket Sound, Vineyard Sound, because of warming waters, just normal warming waters come late spring and summer, and they exit to the east and they exit to the south, and kind of a funnel effect with potentially the horsehead seals waiting to chow down. Obviously, we'll never get a handle on that unless there's more examination of scat on the beach. I know the Center does a lot of work with scat. Somebody has to look at the scat, so hopefully that continues and we get a better handle on what this burgeoning population of horsehead seals is consuming. With winter flounder likely being a major component of what they eat, sea herring and the like. But I can't but believe that these flounders are easy pickings. So that's what I suspect the technical committee is going to have to look at relative to the Gulf of Maine assessment picture.
Thank you, David. Tom Baum.
Thank you, Mark. Just to bring up what Tom Foti had brought up earlier, as Roy Miller was talking about, the absence of occurrence of any winter flounder in its previous southern range. Actually, it was NOAA, the essential fish habitat branch of NOAA basically is redesignating the winter flounder egg essential fish habitat as redesignating it south of Absecon Inlet, which is basically at Atlantic City. They're redesignating that as it no longer is essential fish winter flounder habitat for eggs, thus allowing dredging to occur in the marinas and elsewhere. And that is a concern because it's more of an issue of the status of the stock, and it's reduced range. So I believe New Jersey, will still be able to comment on if there is any aggravation of spawning winter flounder. We will still be able to recommend a winter flounder spawning window, dredging window, but where that goes, then it's up to the administration. But thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I'm down to my last few minutes here, and we've still got elected vice chair. I had Richie White, and I'd like to make sure we have given Tony the advice she needs on tasking the technical committee, AP, and the letter and contact to the agency, to the council. Richie White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be quick. One more example, as we had in southern New England lobster, as we have in northern shrimp, where we're starting to deal with a population that's not responding, and you lower fishing mortality to about as low as you can lower it. What do you do and what do you say? And I think this is an issue, and it sounds like weak fish, I might add. So I think this is something that policy board, management, and science, that from a commission standpoint, I think we're going to have to start looking at how do we handle these species going forward. Thank you.
Tony?
I think we're good. I can repeat back a little bit what we want to have done, just so Ashton and I are clear what's going on, to make sure we didn't miss anything. But for the TC tasking, we want them to review the results of the assessment and report back to the board on, ways that we can react to the assessment to see if there's things that we can do to rebuild. In particular, looking at the moratorium years from federal waters to see if that did have any positive impacts on the stock. Also looking at the specifications that are currently in place and whether or not those should be altered, both for the Gulf of Maine and southern New England, mid-Atlantic. Did I miss anything there?
Sounds good to me. And then Bud just handed me a note that says we need AP members, so I don't know if they have a functional AP at this point to give us advice on specifications as well.
We can look at that and let the individual states know who we'll send a note to the individual states on your AP attendance for the calls that we have had in the past, and see if you want to appoint new members, and also gauge the interest of those that are currently on the AP as well. And in terms of the letter, Ashton and I will work on that while we're here this week and get back to a couple of folks for your input there. And then that letter is to express our concerns for the condition of both stocks, but highlight the critical need in southern New England, and go there. And then for the Northeast Regional Coordinating Council, again, I think we'll reiterate what's in the letter. Is there any tasking, are there any collaborative projects or research that we think that we should stress that needs to be done? Or do we need to ask the TC if there's any additional research that could be done for priorities that would help enhance the assessment or enhance our understanding or knowledge of why this stock is not responding? And I don't know, Paul, if you think that there's even anything out there. These can be long-term, more short-term projects, but...
I think gear work and determining the efficiency would be useful. I know some work's already underway in doing that, but it's not the easiest thing to get at, and I think we do need more work on that.
Bill Adler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. would it be possible that if you're giving a little list to the TC to look at, whether they can do something or not, that what I brought up before about could they look at perhaps reducing that target threshold level from where it is now down a little? Now, I know this isn't going to bring the flounder back, but it makes it a little bit more realistic as to, well, if we can get up to that next notch, whereas you'll never get up to the notch you're at now. And I don't know whether it's the TC that sort of, well, would they consider asking us, however we have to do it, to change that level? And then the second thing goes back to that natural mortality. Is there anything they can look at and get? I think I heard somebody around here saying that they could get some information to let us better assess the natural, I'm going to call it natural mortality, which will include the predation, just so we'll start to get some pictures. So I'm just throwing that out as maybe you could tack that on to the list of things that you want the technical committee to at least look at. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Bill. I mean, the natural mortality assumption and the rebuilding targets, BMSY, they come right out of the stock assessment and peer review process. So technical committee in its body is not going to be able to change that. But I think that could be on the list of technical committee tasking is, what are their opinion on the appropriateness of a constant M through time and the feasibility of obtaining the BMSY level that currently exists. To be comfortable with that, Paul, and being tacked onto your list.
I don't know, can you put the recruitment? I guess I'm a little, slide 46. I guess I'm a little more pessimistic on what we can take apart from the stock assessment. I mean, to me, nothing's going to change in the stock. We're not going to hit rebuilding targets unless we change that recruitment trend. If recruitment continues to decline, the biomass targets don't mean anything. The projections for that biomass target in 2014 basically just assumes that recruitment comes back and we're going to get there. And any projection is going to do that. Right now, I'm not convinced we can turn recruitment around until we see evidence of being able to see a production coming back in. I guess I don't know what we can do.
Dave Simpson.
Yeah, just to that, and I guess for the point of the letter, it seems clear to me that recruitment is suffering both from probably changing natural mortality rates in the first year of life and beyond, but also a lack of spawning biomass. I think you're deeply into the density-dependent recruitment, and there's just not enough adult winter flounder out there reproducing to produce a strong year class, despite the last two winters, which should have been great. Nice cold winters, protracted cold into the spring that keeps predators at those early life stages like, sand shrimp from eating up all the newly recruited juveniles, bottom tending juveniles. So I think that is something, and it's a long road back. But yeah, it is facing other challenges. Penny Howell has been revisited some work she did 20 or 30 years ago with our SANE survey, which we used to do through the summer. Until recently, we're doing it in September for a final count. And she can see, having done it for a few years again, from June through September, that settlement looks pretty decent in June and looks worse in July and worse in August and looks terrible by September. So there is that first year of life mortality that seems to be elevated from previous, but it just makes it all the more critical that if we can leave adults in the water to reproduce, that we need to try to do that.
Thanks. I'll just briefly let the board know that Jeremy Colley at URI GSO has a Sea Grant award to look at life stage bottlenecks in winter flounder with the large database that's available on different life stages and try to see where, in fact, what life stage things have broken down. So I think there's going to be some good work done on that that might give us some insight on where the life history is broken down, not necessarily a cure for it, but I think that's going to be coming. It's my sense that we have a pretty good idea, Tony, of what we need to ask of the technical committee and what we're going to do with the contact with the council. Is there anything else on that before I move to the last agenda item, which is election of the vice chair? Dave Simpson.
Yeah, I'd like to nominate Dr. Pierce for vice chair.
Thank you for that. Dave Pierce has been nominated. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, I'll close nominations and congratulate Dr. Pierce. Studying winter flounder for a long time. Welcome back. Is there any other business to come before this board? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Yes, moved by everyone and seconded by everyone. Thank you. We are adjourned.